I thought.
Let him in.
Randy's still broken though.
His audio's been fine.
I could move my lips while he talks.
A little ventriloquism. All right. Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to another advocacy update here at KASB. As always, I'm Austin Harris, the Director of Member Engagement here at the association, joined by our advocacy team, Scott Rothschild, Leah Fleiter, and Mark Tallman. They've had a very busy week, and in just a little bit, we're going to give them to fill us in. The short answer is a lot, but we are excited today to have a special guest. Education Commissioner Dr. Randy Watson's with us today. He also had a busy week with a state board meeting and unveiling some plans for what next steps might look like for schools as we continue to reopen during the COVID-19 pandemic. So we're going to get started with Dr. Watson. As always, if you have any questions for Dr. Watson or anyone else in the group, drop those into the chat. We'll keep an eye on it and we'll make sure that we give the best answer we can. And if we don't have an answer, we'll go find one for you. Dr. Watson, I know the internet's been a little shaky for you, but if you're hearing us, let's go ahead and start with a bit of conversation around Navigating Next. You unveiled it to the state board this week and they approved it as the recommendation moving forward. So what's in Navigating Next and what's it mean for our school leaders?
Thank you, and good to see all of you. Thanks for joining us. So I understand we are having some internet issues. Hopefully you can hear me. It looks like everything should be fine on our end, but I'm not sure why we're having a little trouble. State Board is taking a look at a document which I put in the chat called Navigating Next. I'm going to pull up my screen, hopefully, and share with you the major components of that. And just walk you through this. So the state board, this is a planning document for your boards and administrative teams to start now and use through Memorial Day. Now the plans will go much further. They'll go into the summer and the next 2 years, but this is a planning document. It's only about 35 pages, and it was meant to give very specific guidance as to what you should do. So right now, based upon the polling that we did yesterday, 27% of school districts in Kansas have not started to vaccinate teachers. They have not started. Most of that is not because they don't want to, it's because they don't have access to vaccinations. Governor Kelly has put as a top priority to have teachers vaccinated. She is reaching out to counties that have not started the vaccination process to assist in getting that done. But priority number one is get a schedule to vaccinate your staff. So I'm gonna pick on Newton, for example, in Harvey County. Obviously, Newton has a lot of teachers, and they may only get X amount of doses per week that go to teachers. So you want to prioritize your staff, those staff that are over 65 possibly, staff that have underlying conditions, staff that work with high needs kids. But vaccinate your staff is number one on this. And then as you see this, I'm not going to go over all this with you because you have a copy of this, but the second priority really should be to start to take a look at the class of 21. We already know that just by looking at the National Student Clearinghouse data, that less students went on to post-secondary in any level in the class of 20 than in the last 7 years. That concerns us. And so we want to make sure the class of 21 is ready to graduate high school and execute their post-secondary plan. And then I apologize. I'm not sure why we went. Sometimes, there we go. And then the rest of this document is about looking at summer school and next school year and doing it differently. Addressing learning activities that will promote social emotional learning and high academic learning in a fun, engaging environment using that Navigating Change document, and then using your funds using your funds from the federal government to support those activities. So that's a high level overview. If we have questions on that, I'd be happy to talk about that or anything else that maybe that we did with the board yesterday.
Yeah, as we wait for some questions to come in, Dr. Watson, can you unpack a little bit your vision for summer education and closing those learning gaps, both academically and socially, emotionally? I know that's been passion for you.
Yeah, absolutely. So what we don't want to do, and you all know this, but it's going to happen somewhere. Don't bring kids in and put them on a computer. Let's just, or an iPad. Let's just not do that. We have as much of a social emotional loss as we do an academic loss, but what you want to do first is assess both of those to know what that loss is, and then think about those summer camps, those space camp and STEM activities, and how do we engage in high level learning through competencies in an engaging way. So summer school should be offered and ready to roll. Bring, of course, special needs kids in, make sure we're transitioning those special needs kids. So 6 weeks, we'll give you some guidance. We'll be working with teachers and administrators to plan that. That should be step one. And then I highly encourage you to extend your school year. Let's say start August 1 instead of August 15. Extend your school year and get much more learning over the next 2 years, and do it differently. Set it up differently than what we have done traditionally. We like to think that when we're going to catch kids up, that catching up is going to be simply a drill and kill environment, and it should not be that. And we'll be happy to give you the resources and assistance in doing that.
I think that's a great segue to a question we hear all the time. You know, for months now, people have been talking about trying to use the summer as a way to close some of those gaps. But then their first question is, what resources are going to be available for us? What tools will we have at our disposal? So what are some of those tools and resources that are going to be available to folks over the summer?
Well, first of all, please get your teams to go back to the document that Kansas produced in July of 2020 called Navigating Change. That document took all of the standards and put them into competencies, and then it put it into grade bands, and then it combined those into STEM and STEAM and humanities. Teachers are tired, administrators are tired, kids and parents are tired. So please put teachers into groups together, allow them to team teach. The competencies are written in that way. Do it across age levels, blend your age levels so that you can hit a lot of different age levels, and then consider putting them into either humanities type of projects or STEAM, science, technology, mathematics type of projects. That work has been started for you, templated out for you, and we'll be doing a lot more training with staff over the next several weeks. That's a direction that we want school districts to go anyway. And so we really need the summer to be highly fun, engaging, bringing the community in and reestablishing the community in schools. That is what our biggest loss has been. It's this normal, and when people talk about the normal, it's that vibrancy between the community and schools that we've lost it through hybrid and remote. So we want to reestablish.
Lost just the very end of that, but as we continue to think about the resources for summer and how that ties into the overall package of resources available to schools, you talked to the state board this week about creating some oversight and some channels to be transparent about the way in which federal dollars are being spent around COVID relief. So what was your conversation with the state board, and what's the plan moving forward for how we treat those dollars?
Absolutely. So there are 4 major pots of money that you either have currently or will be getting. And I'm going to use the acronym. It's ESSER 1. You have that money now. It's $80 million throughout the state distributed on the Title I formula. Can be used in 15 categories for learning. ESSER 2, you'll be having access to by April 1. That's $330 million statewide. And then there's an EANS set of money, which is for private schools of $27 million. And we believe, before we get to spring break, Congress will have passed ESSER 3, which if the dollar amount is correct of what's in there now, it could be over $500 million on top of what we already have. In order to establish how to make sure we're spending that money correctly, so that when the federal audit comes later on, that there's no surprises and you have to pay that money back, I have authorized, in the process of authorizing, a 19-member task force made up of legislators, state board members, superintendents, business managers, teachers, private school liaisons, the budget director from the state of Kansas, and all plans of how to spend this money within the 15 categories of helping kids and families. And we'll have to go through this task force. That task force will be up and running here in the next 7 days, 7 calendar days. That's what I'm trying to hit. And by March, we'll be receiving applications from you. So we'll be giving you application. Here's how you apply. Here are the categories. Here's what you need to tell us. And then once you get that, you can start drawing down that money. If you change your plans, which is likely to happen, you'll submit a modified plan to the task force and they will assist.
So we do have a question here in the chat for you, Commissioner, from Claudia. She's wondering if we'll be able to feed kids over the summer as we did last summer. That'll be an important piece of trying to make the summer a tool for school. So any plans or conversations around the ability to feed students in that time?
I know that there's conversations. I have not seen the final regulations out of Washington of whether that will be allowed or not. But I look for that guidance to come before we get to March. So hang tight, but I think there's certainly a lot of talk about doing that again.
Mr. Tallman.
If there's not something in the chat, I spend a lot of time with legislators of varying political stripes. And I guess I'd maybe ask whether you could reflect on something you felt comfortable. You know, if you add up all the money that we've got or may get, that's approaching about $1 billion, which is kind of like getting the 6-year Gannon phase in all in 1 year. And even though you don't have to spend it all in 1 year, it's not repeating. So do you have any guidance to basically say, how can school leaders try to make sure they're really being effective with those dollars? Because my suspicion is there's not only going to be federal auditors looking at how you spent it, there's going to be a lot of state legislators asking what really happened with that. And for those of us that are always trying to explain how more money is what we need to get better results, they're going to be looking at what we see. So how are you looking at it from the viewpoint of assistance or recommendations, or where can we go to think about the way to really make sure we're using an awful lot of money pretty quick to get good lasting results?
Excellent question, Mr. Tallman. You want to make sure that the activities, first and foremost, of the money that you will receive should go for learning activities that engage families and students that have been impacted by the pandemic. The task force will not allow any dollar to be spent that is not going to go for things that have been impacted by the pandemic. So that is the first challenge. Now, as we do this, we know that we had students that were not progressing social, emotionally, and academically to the level that we wanted. This is a great opportunity to really infuse and help those students over a 2 to 3 year period. So ESSER 2 has to be spent by 23, ESSER 1 by 22, and if there's ESSER 3, That'll be spent by 24. So it's a 2 to 3 year. Doesn't all have to happen this summer, Mr. Tallman, but those plans should be solid about how do we really engage. Time, structure, and getting kids engaged in high activities. Don't put the money on a salary schedule or things that have to be sustained after the money's gone. But do pay teachers full salary to do this work. But it's going to be a temporary work. It's a 2 to 3 year window of everything that we've ever wanted in terms of we got the money. We're going to come out of a pandemic, which we're so excited about. And now we can charge ahead to do the work that we always wanted to do. It needs to be purposeful. It needs to be organized. And that's what the task force is going to hold all.
Do you have a follow-up there, Mr. Tallman?
Well, while he is frozen, I may just ask one other question that people might be interested. And this mostly is just spending too much time in virtual committee hearings with him. But maybe people want to know a little bit about what are the current plans for assessments this year, what might or might not happen, and kind of your thoughts on how does that maybe become a baseline for looking at what you've done and what other assessments are available besides the state assessments that people can be looking at to see where they are and track what's happening over the next few years.
So we are planning to give the state assessments. We're moving forward. In fact, with the DLM, Dynamic Learning Map, we're already giving those assessments for the lowest cognitively impaired students. We plan to give the state assessments starting in April. The question will be, will it be required by the federal government? We don't know that yet. The Biden administration has not given us the answer. If it is for federal accountability, there are very strict protocols that we have to adhere to when we give that state assessment because it's for federal accountability. If it's not, because they waive the federal, we will still give the state assessment, but we could do that in a much, if you're in a remote environment, for example, or you're in a hybrid environment, the structure could be a little bit different. But I need to caution everyone, if we go down that road, it will not be then, it will be hard to compare district to district. We won't, that's not what the purpose will be. It will be to see what was the learning loss in a summative way from the spring of 19 to the spring of 21. Now, that being said, there's all kinds of local assessments that all of you have. FastBridge is the most common one. I just was looking at FastBridge data from across the state today, and it's interesting. We give free interim assessments that you can give to your district. They're free, and they project, and they can tell you what skills. We give free in-class formative assessments that any teacher can use. MAP assessment, Renaissance assessment. All of those local, Mr. Tallman, need to be done too. In order to ask the question, what is the learning academic loss that we've seen? What's the academic loss that we've seen? It's harder to measure the social emotional because Diane asked this question, but you're going to need to measure that. Now, some of you have Panorama or other things that'll measure that, and we have a program that's free that you can do that too. But it's mostly a survey of parents and kids of what the loss has been. And then you'll want to combine those as we go forward and making sure that you're tracking, are we making progress and doing that? Because we really can't wait until the spring of 22 to find out what happened to state assessments again. We're going to have some interim measures here as we go forward. And Diane, I hope I answered your question. Social emotional programs or staff should be accounted for. There are a lot. We don't specify any particular one. We do have a fairly free one. So some cost of materials that we have out of University of Kansas, but there are many great ones. But we're going to really need to engage families and kids. I was reading a national article that said kids were interviewed, and several of the kids said, "Stop talking about the learning loss. That's not what we're concerned about. We're concerned that we haven't seen our friends, that we can't go out and socialize like we did. Even sports have been disrupted because of quarantines. We want to kind of get back together and reestablish that."
Another question here in the chat for you. Thoughts on how best to support ESOL kids? And Claudia highlights that her district numbers are low, but that she's worried about the loss they specifically have faced this year.
Oh, absolutely, Claudia. I mean, if you've been in a remote or hybrid situation, for sure, and kids that are studying at home where English is not the native first language spoken, they're being immersed in their native language, whatever that may be. So that needs to be part of the plan too, of bringing those kids in, and again, over the next couple of years, really trying to accelerate their acquisition of the English language. So take your ESL programs and bring those kids in, and again, make it fun and engaging. And we've given go back to the navigating change. We've given the template to do that, but we hope that we do that.
We'll give just a second here for any final questions for the commissioner. Our team, Mark, Leah, Scott, any other questions you'd like to ask?
Not at this time.
You'll reserve that for later, won't you, Mr. Tallman? Well, Dr. Watson, as we kind of wrap up the time together, any final words you'd like to share with the group this afternoon?
Yeah, I mentioned teachers are weary, school principals, superintendents, you all are too, school board members are too, but now's not the time. We still need to accelerate. We got to plan. We got to heavily plan on the next 2 years. We'll be. I know we're running these 400-meter sprints, one after the other. But now's not the time to let off the pedal. We're coming out. We're in the first early stages of coming out of the pandemic as we know it today. Vaccinations are going to help us a lot. And by the time we get about 4 weeks from now, 6 weeks from now, a lot of staff will be vaccinated. I heard Dr. Fauci last night talk about possibly by the fall, vaccinations for kids might have been approved. So we're rounding the curve, but we've got a lot of work to do. And now we've got to start planning for accelerating the loss that we've seen over the last calendar year. Even if you've been in school the entire time, you've been disrupted. And we want to make sure that we take this advantage, both for the money and the time to do this right. We'll stand next to you to help you in any way you can, but as what's really great about Kansas is the responsibility is on you to really execute. And as you know, that's what's great. And that's also what the burden is. So we appreciate the work of the local school boards, and the state board wanted me to make sure to convey how appreciative they are of your hard work during this.
Well, we appreciate your time and your continued efforts, Dr. Watson. Thank you for joining us this afternoon and giving us some insight into your work with the Department of Education and some of the happenings at the state board.
Thank all of you, and it's good to see you. Stay warm. That will be difficult, and stay safe, everyone.
We're going to move on to some of the legislative specific news that we've had this week. And as has become my routine, there's been a lot of it. And so our advocacy staff has been very busy this week, a lot of news to cover, but we're going to start with action around private school aid. And Leah, that brings us to you. We've got 3 separate bills that we're tracking, but let's start with Senate Bill 61 and House Bill 2068. Oh, you're muted.
I didn't know I had to unmute these things.
I know.
Who knew? Who knew? So last night, the Senate voted 23-14 to pass Senate Bill 61, which is the tax credit, tuition tax credit scholarships bill. That is a bill that is identical to House Bill 2068, which was passed out of the House K-12 Education Committee. Let's see, yes, just last week, I believe. That bill, that House bill, has not been scheduled for floor debate. The Senate bill was finalized after about 3.5 hours of some rather intense debate at times, and that 23-14 vote was is an interesting tally, because if the governor were to veto this bill or a similar bill, it would take 27 votes in the Senate to override that veto. So that could be a sign that perhaps support for the bill is not as strong as we had initially feared. And as a matter of fact, one of the senators who voted for the bill last night said he was astonished. That was his word. He was astonished at the volume of opposition that the senators received yesterday, urging them not to approve Senate Bill 61. So I think that's a good sign. That means that our folks are engaged, and we appreciate everything that you all and your colleagues across the state have done. But to kind of touch back on Dr. Watson's comments, this is not the time to let up the gas, and we continue to monitor Senate Bill 61 and, of course, House Bill 2068. Again, those are those identical bills that expand the state's existing tuition tax credit program. Now, on February 11th, which was only yesterday, the House K-12 Education Budget Committee approved House Bill 2119, which is a new bill, a new program to create education savings accounts. Education savings accounts would allow parents to take the amount of the base aid for their student for the preceding school year and put that into a savings account that would be administered by the state treasurer. And they could then use those expenses, that savings account, for homeschooling or private school expenses. Much different than the existing tuition tax credits program, which is currently capped at $10 million annually and is currently restricted only to free lunch eligible students who attend the state's 100 lowest performing elementary schools. And those, as you probably imagine, are schools that are in poverty. So the tuition tax credits bills that we're opposing would expand that program to free and reduced students, and would expand it to include any public school students in the state. So quite a bit of an expansion, not only of the tuition tax credits bill, but then under 2119, the education savings accounts bill. This is a completely different program, and it would be open to a large number of students in the state. I think our estimate was around 200,000 kids, I think, which, we've got 470 some thousand kids total in our public schools. So again, some efforts that we're following around tuition tax credits and education savings accounts. I would like to turn this over to Scott and Mark real quick, because they listened yesterday to the 2119 discussion, and I think we want to talk a little bit too about accreditation and some of those issues around these bills.
Well, I can pick up first and then have Scott join in. We talked to you, I think, over the last couple of weeks about 2119. The committee did make some amendments to it before it came out, before recommending it. Number one, they clarified that only students who are currently enrolled in public schools would be eligible. So at one point it was unclear about whether this benefit would be extended to kids who are already attending private or home schools. Second thing they did was remove homeschools. It is still open to non-accredited, non-public schools or public or private schools accredited by other than the state board, but it specifically excludes homeschools and homeschool groups and things like that. One thing that is still in that is a little complicated, and it's hard to just explain this, that I'm not going to try very hard orally, but they, as I think you all know, one of the triggers of this, one of the things that's clearly pushing this is kids who've been in remote learning. And they rewrote the bill to basically say if the bill was to go into effect and up and running for next school year, the count of how many hours a child who is required to be in remote or hybrid, that clock would start this January. So if you had kids out of school last spring, as you all did, that wouldn't count. If you had kids out of school this fall semester, that wouldn't count. But if you have kids that are missing time, that you're not open for in-person learning this semester, that would potentially count if the program could be up and running next year. Now, there are several questions about that that we're not entirely sure on. So those were some of the, oh, and one other thing that was done, and I think we'll see this probably carrying through, it was also amended to briefly restore the high density at-risk weighting factor, which expired in state law, was continued for 2 years by an appropriations proviso. So the legislature is going to have to put that back in at some point, or it's going to cost some of our higher poverty districts about $50 million. That was put back in, but as near as I can tell, only for the same amount of time as the proviso. So it doesn't appear that it helped very much. And I think the intention was not very long. Now, I am seeing a question of remote by choice. Remote by choice does not count. It is, the language is if you required students to be remote or hybrid, and hybrid is kind of defined. So it doesn't factor that way. Scott, am I missing something? It is important to kind of remember just structurally how this works. If a child is eligible for one of these accounts, then an amount equal to base state aid can be put into an account for them, which they can then use for a long list of items, including private school tuition, or they can enroll in a public school part-time and a proportional amount of state aid. So if they go to a public school half-time, they would get half base state aid in the account, you'd get half base state aid, but they could use that half for a variety of other services. Interestingly enough, they expanded the language on what you could purchase from public school districts. So you can maybe get in a little entrepreneurial business of providing programs to these students on the side. The bill continues to say that if a student leaves, you get to continue to receive their weighted enrollment, which is usually around 30 or 40% of the base on average for 3 years, and it doesn't change the using the prior year or the second prior year enrollment. So the enrollment effect of this would be delayed under the bill, which kind of adds to the cost of the state, but of course, eventually you would lose those dollars. Scott, am I missing anything that you can recall?
No, and really, I just, as Lee explained on Senate Bill 61, the tax credit program, if you were to say that's the nose of the camel getting in the tent, I think you'd have to say House Bill 2119. You've got the whole camel in the tent. You've got the caravan. You've got the camel's friends. This is a drastic change, or would be a drastic change in our public school system. And I've been looking on the Education EdChoice website. There are 6 states that have this kind of program: Arizona, Florida, Mississippi, Nevada, Tennessee. I may be missing one there. But, the debate on Senate Bill 61, there was a lot of debate. Are tax credits really taking tax dollars? Well, we could debate that all day. House Bill 2119 takes public school funds, gives it to parents, and they can take it over to a private school, and they can pay for education-related services. I think one of the things is to pay for certified tutoring. And I don't know if there's a real definition for what a certified tutor is. So another problem with 2119 is that state treasurer, a lot of the administration of this program, where the savings accounts would be housed and administrated, is in the state treasurer's office under the bill. And State Treasurer Lynn Rogers put out a release yesterday that's on our website, saying this is a very complicated, it's going to take a lot of money and millions of dollars basically to administer. And this is going to possibly deprive funding of schools, of public schools. So there's a lot of issues with both of these bills. 61, of course, is advanced the furthest, but 2119 is on deck. So we really have to kind of beat the bushes on these, because these bills would drastically change public education in Kansas. They've got majorities, and you know, we gotta work with our legislators and get some of those legislators to realize that this is not the direction we want to go.
We've been working on trying to get that message across, and I think many people feel that one of the most compelling arguments is to stress that our public school system exists to help everyone. Private schools, while these are always billed as school choice for the parents or the students, choice ultimately resides with the private school. And a way to kind of reach out maybe to people who aren't as engaged in this is to say, do we want to have a system where, we're going to have public funding for schools that can choose their kids and might not choose your school, or choose you, may not choose your style, your student, your child, and the public system will be there. But if we erode it by allowing this division to break down, that's the great long-term advantage that I think we've tried to stress. I guess though I can't help but say one thing, because these meetings, I always get to thinking in these meetings. They make me think about things. We have been dealt. There's no question that the people and organizations pushing these are taking advantage of the pandemic and the parental dissatisfaction that exists, and that's unfortunate for choices that we didn't make. But you just heard we're getting hundreds of millions of dollars to help engage families and parents and deal with that and create new services. And I guess I'd be thinking pretty hard about, the only way we lose under these bills is if people choose not to attend their public school. That's a real danger. But I think part of what we need to be thinking about is, what are we doing every day to make sure our families and our kids want to be here because they see it's the best offering available. I think that needs to be a little bit of our planning too, because I hope these can be slowed down. We were surprised, I think, as Leah said, that the vote in the Senate was maybe not as strong as we thought. And the second bill is a much more dramatic approach, that there may be, and I think Scott may want to mention this, we talked this morning, an awful lot of people in their explanations of vote in the Senate were explaining how, well, this isn't, I wouldn't want to take public dollar, but you can argue the semantics, but you can't really argue the semantics on the second bill. Nonetheless, we know the environment we're in. We know the legislature's changed. So I think we need to be prepared for continuing push to expand options for students. I think we just need to be thinking about every day, what are we doing to make sure all of our students want to be in our schools? And I think most of them will.
And you heard it from Commissioner Watson, you've heard it from our team. It's critical right now that you're talking to your legislators, opening up lines of communication with them, especially those who are freshmen in both the House and the Senate. Frankly, they don't know what they don't know. And so you can be a line of communication that helps inform them about the work that your schools are doing, about the way that you're serving all students all the times, and why they should continue to support those endeavors. So we'll continue to work on Senate Bill 61, House Bill 2068, and 2119, but we hope you'll join us in those efforts as they continue to progress through the legislative session. That probably would have been enough in the education world to keep us far from where legislation stops. Leah, you paid attention to some legislation around requirements of civics tests for graduation. We've said in the past that KSB supports well-rounded, civically engaged students, but we oppose this bill based on who has authority over that, correct?
That's right, Austin. The House Education Committee sent House Bill 2039 to the full House this week. It is a bill that requires Kansas students to pass a citizenship test that's modeled after the naturalization test, requires them to pass that test in order to receive their high school diploma. They would be, I think they'd be allowed to take it anytime between, say, eighth grade and 12th grade. As long as you pass it, that means you get your diploma. Well, I think everybody on this call already knows that our students already have to take U.S. history, U.S. government. they learn about the United States Constitution, and they have to pass those classes and get that credit in order to graduate from high school. So part of our argument is that, yes, civics education is very important, but I think this would be somewhat redundant. And we also talked about how we're trying to focus more on civically engaged students who are getting that knowledge out in the community, maybe through an internship with a local elected body, or with their local school board member or their local state legislator, rather than just focusing on seat time and yet another standardized test. And then, of course, we also mentioned that the nut of all this is that really it's the State Board of Education that is given the authority over curriculum by our state constitution. And so while we agree with the goals of increasing civic engagement, and we mentioned the Kansans Can goals and how the state is working on that issue, we don't believe that requiring students to pass yet another test is really going to accomplish what the sponsor would like to accomplish. So we pledge to continue to work with the legislature and the state board on this issue. The chairman of the committee is very passionate about this civics test and his quest to make us all better citizens. And he went over and met with the state board this week during their monthly meeting. Talked quite a bit with them about that. They've authorized him to be their sort of liaison with the legislature, and I think they're probably going to put him to work on that. So I think you can expect a lot more discussion of this issue, and I think those of us on this call may think it shouldn't be an issue. It's already being covered, but this is not a topic that's going to go away. And I think you'll hear more from this, not only from the legislature, but probably from the state board and the State Department of Education as well.
Conversations on school funding and finance law was also prevalent in the legislature this week. Scott and Mark, you paid attention to that. We've got a lot of competing requests and arguments in the way of school funding. The governor's proposed that we fund Gannon fully and continue progress on that front. State board has asked that some funding is given to some other program and priorities that they have. And of course, the legislature is looking at things ranging from tax cuts to playing with the way that weightings are configured. So what's happening in the legislature tied to school funding? Where are we at in the process, and what might we expect over the next couple of weeks?
Let me go back to Diane's question. Any talk of reducing K-12 budget and making USD's backfill with federal COVID aid? Not overtly, but I think that is very clearly a subtext. The committees are getting lots of briefings on just how much money is coming in, not only from what the commissioner talked about, but the fact that I believe there's estimates over $150 million in county COVID money that went to school districts this year. So it's a substantial amount of money, and with legislative skepticism perhaps about how it's being used, particularly if there are high profile districts that aren't back in school yet fully. There's a lot of skepticism, and we think that's we think that's exactly what will be contemplated. The Senate had its hearing on the department budget this week. We testified. Honestly, the breakdown is that the governor recommended continuing to fund Gannon, which is basically adding about $100 million a year in base state aid and direct aid alone, not counting contributions for capers and such. There's a long list of other items that would be really good, like increased special education funding and CTA transportation and dyslexia coordinators and on and on and on, that the governor didn't put in. But I think the governor was trying to somewhat balance a budget and stick to what the court had approved. That's what we chose to focus on. The committee has not started working that yet. The House Budget Committee, K-12 Budget Committee, was supposed to have its first hearing on Monday. They postponed that because of the weather till the following week. But I will tell you that in the hearing last night, was it just last night, Scott? There was a lot of, well, we're not hearing from school districts, and how are they going to use this money, and what's going on? My friends, as we've been saying for weeks and weeks, and you're sick of hearing me, you have to tell them what you're doing. Through your lobbyists, through your organizations, work with us, go directly, testify, put something in writing, but you need to spell out why you're doing, what your plans are, what successes you've seen, what challenges are still out there, around the idea that you're getting more money under Gannon. What are you spending it on? You're getting more money for COVID relief. Why do we need that in addition to? And that's the point we tried to make in our testimony. The money coming in as part of Gannon is to restore where we were a decade ago relative to inflation, relative to other states. Now we've been hit with a massive new amount of cost and challenges. And if we simply, take that money to backfill what we were getting, we're not going to be able to make that restoration of where we wanted to go. That's our big issue. A couple of other things very quickly. This week, the Senate, our friends in the Senate Education Committee, having a hearing on Senate Bill 173, which goes back to the issue of the high density weighting expiring. And some of you remember 2 years ago, a legislative post audit that said, well, it raised questions about how we're running at-risk programs. So this is a bill that was really crafted last year, and we were asked to work on it. USA, some of the individual groups, and the Kansas Policy Institute, everyone that testified, and we tried to come up with a bill that would, I guess the best way is to say it, tighten up some things around at-risk funding, but still leave some flexibility for districts. We think it does that. We think it does not make a dramatic departure, but it does require some new documentation, a little more focused work, and it would extend the high density weighting till 2023 and then require a new at-risk audit similar to what we had a few years ago to kind of see what's happening and what's changing. That is being heard on Wednesday, and then Thursday there is a bill to simply, I'm trying to get that bill number. What it would do is just make the high density at risk permanent, which of course would be our preferred position, but I think that's probably not very realistic, although we certainly will support that. Also, finally, on Thursday, the Senate is having a hearing on the same bill we talked about in the House. Their bill is Senate Bill 93. The House is 2067, that has some language about boards needing to allocate their resources to achieve the Rose standards. The bill on its face does not really direct you to do anything, but it's kind of one of those things that people can say, well, see, the problem is you're not spending your money correctly. And it all ties back to this having to spend 65% on instruction. We're going to talk about how that's an unrealistic target, and it really denigrates all the other things. The second biggest thing that districts spend money on is building and operating school buildings, which we're now wanting to penalize you for because you don't have kids in school buildings. But that doesn't count toward that 65%. So we're going to try to continue to point that out in testimony. But once again, your voices in explaining to your legislators your budget choices, what you do, why you do it, really backs us up pretty well. So that's kind of where we are with the budget. The House hearing has been pushed off till a week from Monday. We'll keep you posted.
I might just add a couple of points on or one point on the budget. The mental health school initiative, which I believe is in its third year, is really being well received in the legislature. Legislators on both sides of the aisle are getting a lot of positive feedback from the schools about how this is so important. In fact, some comments have said, this may be a good reason to expand Medicaid because they're having trouble finding counselors and things like that. But, and the second point is, although the legislators, some of these committees are calling in people to complain about schools not being in session, the people who are coming to complain are demanding the schools be open because they say the schools are so great. So it's kind of an interesting irony there that the legislators are hearing that, our schools are so great, and that's the reason these people are so angry. So I don't know. I just thought I'd throw that in there.
Scott, I got to add one more point to that. That wonderful mental health program, not counted under instruction.
Interesting. And it has saved lives, according to a lot of the counselors who have testified. I mean, it's a great program.
As always, we'll continue to watch school funding as it progresses through. Again, that's a place for you to be talking to your legislators, for you to be explaining what your school's doing, how it's spending its money, how that 65%, depending on what you put into it, is supporting students and their outcomes. So important to continue those conversations. We were watching a number of other bills this week, including Senate Bill 32, which is geared at helping students pay if they're in concurrent enrollment as high school and collegiate students. So team, what happened on Senate Bill 32 and where's that headed?
Senate Bill 32 passed the Senate pretty overwhelmingly / unanimously, I think, and it is now in the House Education Committee. Might just note we're also watching some bills around some post-secondary scholarship programs the two bodies are looking at that we're supporting. So a little bit of work and interest in that area, but probably our top priority is Senate Bill 32. So if you're just dying to talk to members of the House Education Committee, talk to them about that bill would be very positive. And thank your senator, because I think everyone that was there voted for that. I might just mention, I know we're going to quickly run out of time, but these are some bills I saw. Just a reminder, we're continuing to also look at some bills around health and safety issues, foster care report card, vision screening. Leah's been watching some things around child welfare oversight. None of these are really super core to affecting us, but they're part of our general policy positions we've taken on helping students be safe and healthy mentally and physically. So there is some work the legislature is doing there. There was also a hearing this week on the a school bus safety bill, stop arm camera. That got a hearing. I don't think there was any opposition, was there, Leah? So even though that raises some kind of legal questions, there does seem to be general support for at least the concept in general. I think oh no, there's Austin. Sorry, you switched your place on the screen. Or maybe Austin is frozen.
Or his internet dropped. Yes, that could be. I didn't see any other questions in the chat. I guess we have a few minutes. Are there any more questions for us before we leave you all off for what we hope is a warm and safe weekend? I think we want to remind everyone that we will be sending out this afternoon a written summary of the bills that we discussed in this this call. So be on the lookout for that. That's a new Friday email you'll be getting after these updates, and it gives you kind of the written status of the bills and what our take is on them, how we've testified, links to the testimony, links to the various committees if you wish to contact them. So keep an eye out for that. That's a new effort that we're doing every Friday after these updates.
Thank you, Leah. We'll just wrap up by saying we appreciate your joining us, and tell all your friends that this will be posted shortly and available all weekend. So, huddle up with the KS.
That's right.
And if there's anything we can do to help you and your districts more directly, please let us know. But keep those calls and testimony and emails coming. It does make a difference. We have heard a lot about that. So you need to keep your voices heard, and that of your friends, colleagues, neighbors, and everyone else around this.
We've got Austin back.
Okay, Austin, are you back to wrap it up? We've done your work for you, I think. All you need to do say is goodbye.
I know. I think so. Full credit to you, Ms. Dahlman. You wrapped it up perfectly. So I'll just say that. Goodbye, and we'll see you next week.
Use the mic. It's just great.
Thanks, everybody.